This project took me nearly 2 years to complete. Me and the client have been discussing and brainstorming multiple options for an art piece for on his wall in Altea, Spain. I made a few test pieces and he liked the shape of one and the color and the wood of another. So I told him, okay, I'm just gonna make it, and then if you like it, you can buy it, and if you don't, then I'll keep it and put it up for sale, because I knew this would be an art piece that people would love. It all started with 2 rough walnut slabs. The figuring and the shape of the slabs is just stunning. The grain also, which you'll see later in the video, has pure character. As with any project, especially hardwood slabs, you want to cut them oversize. I'm going to pour epoxy between the 2 slabs, so it's going to join them together. But epoxy never cures perfectly, so you want to be able to cut off the size and make the piece to its final dimensions without any flaws. The 2 slabs I will be using for this project are American walnut, and they are book matched. So once you cut a tree through the middle and you flip the outer edges outwards, you have something that is called a book match. The grain patterns line up perfectly and have nearly the same grain as each other. So I need to be very careful about where I put my saw blades, so when I glue them back up together, they line up as perfect as possible. Once the bottom is flat, I will use a pencil to trace a line between the slabs, and I'll use my grinder to remove the needed material so everything lines up once I glue the 2 panels together. I can't find it, but I think somewhere in the video I said this was American walnut. Now, I think I bought it as European walnut, so you can let me know in the comments what you think. Either way, it's just beautiful, of course. And I'll give you a little backstory on a European walnut. Now we're at it, and I gave a lot of information on the big elm tree I made in the last video. Go check that one out after this one. If you have a spare 25 minutes of your day, that would, I know for sure you'll like it. So I thought I knew a lot about European walnut. Apparently I don't. I just looked up some facts, and I do know a lot about wood, but this is just so interesting. Okay, let's start. I have a little story written out in front of me in my own words and wants and needs. Scientifically known as Juglans regia, is one of the oldest cultivated trees in human history. Now that's very interesting to me. Despite its name, it's not originated, or does not originate in Europe. Its roots trace back over 7,000 years to the mountainous regions of Central Asia, particularly areas that are known of modern-day Iran, Kyrgyzstan and surrounding regions. Because of this, it's also called the Persian walnut. See, I already didn't know this. I hope you're not bored by my story. Ancient civilizations quickly recognized the walnut's value. It was rich in oils, easy to store, and packed with nutrients. Traders carried it along early trade routes, including the Silk Road, spreading it westward. The Greeks admired the tree and associated it with wisdom and intelligence, partly because the kernel resembles the human brain. Interesting. Again, interesting. I'm sorry, interesting. Interesting. The Romans played a major role in its expansion throughout Europe. They referred to it as Jovis glans, meaning Jupiter's nut, linking it to the king of the gods. Roman soldiers and settlers planted walnut trees across their empire, helping establish the species in Italy, France, Spain, and beyond. During the Middle Ages, walnut wood became highly prized. The timber of Juglans regia is strong, durable, and beautifully grained. I do agree with that. It is for sure beautifully grained. It was used to craft fine furniture, decorative carvings, and later gun stocks. Now, I do know of gun stocks, and I've seen some that are truly beautiful. Also, the tree, from my experience, does grow on hills, which gives it stress, and you get these really nice grain patterns. The green husks were also used to create a deep brown dye for fabrics and hair. By the 18th century, walnuts were being shipped to North America, often passed through English ports. This led to the common American name called English walnut, even though the species did not originate in England. Today, the European walnut remains the most widely cultivated walnut species in the world. It is also grown extensively in regions with Mediterranean-like climates, especially California, parts of Europe, and Asia. Beyond its commercial value, it continues to symbolize knowledge, resilience, and longevity. So if you buy a table or art piece from Masterworks, you will captivate, symbolize the knowledge, resilience, and longevity. I mean, that would be worth the investment alone, am I right? From ancient Persian mountains to modern oligarchs around the globe, the European walnut has remained a constant companion to human civilization, valued not just as a food, but as a tree of culture, trade, and craftsmanship. That is very interesting. I hope you found that nice to listen to, and let me know in the comments if I should do more story times. Now, let's get back to creating something beautiful. Up until this point, I have flattened the bottom, I have glued the slabs together, and I have grinded away any material which was not flush to the other slab. This is because after I have poured the resin, I want the slabs to be nice and joined, because you don't want to remove any material afterwards and fill it back up. This is something you'll always see in the end, and I don't like that. And right now what you can see me do on the screen is prime the edges, the top and the sides, that is edges, sorry, to remove any micro bubbles or keep the micro bubbles out in the main pour of resin. To make sure the resin doesn't leak out, I use this special material to build a mold around the wood. The material itself is called HDPE, which is some kind of magical material which the epoxy doesn't stick to. So I can reuse this mold over and over and over. I've probably used the mold you can see the slab laying on top of for about 150 projects, probably more. That's in 3 years' time, including chessboards and that kind of thing. So smaller projects have also been made on this mold. But still, I mean, normally you would use a piece of MDF or any other sheet material and you would lay tape on top of it, but maybe it will be fine for one pour, but the second pour it's already going to leak under and you'll have to throw it away and buy new material. So it's quite expensive, this HDPE stuff, but it's just great because you can reuse it over and over again. For the color, I'm going to be using sky blue epoxy. I use a few pigments and I mix them together thoroughly for 4 minutes, about 4 minutes. And I use this color because I have already made a table for this client, which is in Spain, also in his office. So this table, well, it will be a table in the end, will also be seated in his private office in Altea. Sky blue epoxy is one of the most beautiful colors to combine with walnut, in my opinion, and I have sold quite a lot of art pieces doing this combination. So that's why I told the client that if he didn't like it, I would just mount it onto my wall in my showroom, and if anyone comes in who loves it, they can buy it. But that wasn't the case, because he did end up buying the project. But after this whole process of making sure that the art piece was to his liking, we decided to go a different route, but you'll see that later in this video. And a quick tip for people aspiring to work with epoxy or wood is to look at what the thickness is that the epoxy cures on, because you have epoxy which is used as a primer, which obviously you can only use for about 1 millimeter, and that's purely for priming wood or other materials. You have 2 centimeter epoxy, which is I think called tabletop epoxy in England and America, which you use for top coatings. And you have thick pour epoxy. So right here I'm using a thick pour epoxy because it's a thick pour. And that's very important to keep in mind, because if you get the epoxy mixed up and you use the wrong epoxy for the wrong type of project, it might go catastrophically wrong. Just a quick tip. I'm not speaking from experience here. So after the epoxy has cured for about 2 weeks, epoxy cures because of warmth, and the workshop is always nice and warmed up. I have a heater downstairs which makes sure that the epoxy is cured correctly. Don't make it too hot because the epoxy will go exothermic and it will go totally wrong and you might blow up your workshop. But after I've made sure the epoxy is cured, I flatten it on my CNC. Now, my CNC, I was joking about blowing anything up. It just creates a lot of steam and it creates a lot of bubbles, so it might make your project look quite ugly. But after the project is cured, I'll flatten it on my CNC. However, I know a CNC is a luxury item to have. I've worked my ass off to acquire one after flattening for years on a flattening sled or a router sled. Nowadays you can buy them pretty cheap of a company called Speedtool. I do not have any affiliations with them, but those seem to be quite decent from what I've heard. You also have a router sled from Woodpecker, which is a bit more expensive, but I've used that one for years, the Woodpecker one, and it's pretty good. So that is the way to go if you're just starting out and you want to flatten your own projects. You can also find a wood shop. Make sure you tell them that it's epoxy, because some wood shops don't want to flatten wood and epoxy or epoxy. So you can find a company with a CNC. A wide belt sander would be quite nice as well if the bottom of your project is flat. Or you can find a router sled on Marketplace. I think those are the best options if you're just starting out. And now something that I promised you last video, that being the 5.5 meter long elm tree table installed in its final place. The client used a crane to lift the table through the window of their office and installed it in the final destination. So here are some pictures of that, and I must say it's truly stunning. And for this art piece, I am now going to flatten the bottom because I noticed it wasn't totally flat. But it's very important because the carving I was going to do on the top would be quite deep. So I needed to make sure I wasn't going to go through the art piece. But in the end, we decided to make this whole art piece a different functional art piece, being a table. And you'll see later what shape that will be. But anyway, finishing the bottom is an important step. So that's what we're going to do right here. Also, you can see 2 straight lines on the back of these 2 slabs, and that's because it was going to be a piece of wall art, which I hadn't decided here together with the client yet. But that was important because I needed to hang the art piece flat against the wall, and I'm going to make 2 slats which fit perfectly into the 2 straight lines I carved out, which later turned out not to be important at all. Now I want to take the time to talk about a different matter. I started making long-form YouTube content, or long-form being 12 minutes in my head, about 2 years ago. And I've noticed the extreme difficulty that young people have nowadays, and older people, with short form content, so that's 60 seconds and under. It is seriously affecting people's attention span, and I last listened to a podcast of the Diary of a CEO talking about this matter, and it was very interesting to me how such a normalized thing has such an impact on people's lives. I mean, I'm a young man myself, and if I look at my phone the first say hour of the day, I seriously feel my energy drain out for the rest of the day, and I feel a little alone. Now, this is something that I've learned to put to the side and really just focus on creating things, that's where my work really comes in. And I work probably 12 hours a day at the moment, and I just really enjoy it. I'm not on my phone a lot, and I'm not really tired either. I take the time to be with friends and family, but also I really love doing this and making art pieces and videoing everything. It gives me energy, so I guess that's another thing that most people don't have. But it's an interesting thing to me that videos longer than 10 minutes actually help you, especially if it's interesting, and it helps you regain that attention span. So in the last few videos, I asked you if you would like to see more of this long form content, and I would like to think that my content helps people regain their attention span. And for the people who don't know what I'm talking about, it's something that is most often posted on social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Facebook Reels. And most of these videos are called brain rot, so they quite literally rot your brain away. And it's made to suck people into the algorithm and make them watch for hours on end. So let me know in the comment section what you think of this matter. And yeah, I just really think it's quite interesting how this is, of course, a new thing, well, some would say a problem for especially the younger generation. So yeah, let's talk about that. I think that's very interesting. I quickly want to add to the thing I was talking about just now, that if you are struggling with something like this, you can use an app called Opal, which I'm not affiliated with. It's an app that blocks all of your social media or whatever app you choose for a time period of your choice. So I've got a few minutes on it, so I want to go on Instagram, you can't. So it really blocks you from those small moments you don't think about, but it really helps you regain your attention span and, at least for me, my mood on a day. The app is called Opal. Opal, yeah. So I think there's going to be a little change of plans because the wood is just, it's so beautiful. I'm scared that if I put anything in it, like carving out, or it's going to ruin the piece. And the piece is very symmetrical. So what I'm going to do now is flatten this piece even further, because I want to expose all the wood grain and maybe cut it a bit more to size, and then have a look what I'm going to do from there. So yeah, let's do that. What happened in the last clip was me explaining what I'm going to do to this slab, but that's because I sent pictures to the client, and the client said it was too nice to start experimenting on, and we chose to make it a table. So the art piece will be made somewhere in the future, but for now we're just going to make this a beautiful table. For the shape of this table, we chose an 8-figure because it complemented the wood grain, which was bookmatched, and the epoxy in the middle. Everything was, of course, symmetrical, so we needed to think on how this table would look best. Also, we already chose the base, and this would be a suitable shape. Now, enough of promoting other companies. I quickly want to say that if you are looking for your own dream art piece, that I can make it reality. You can send me a message via my phone number or my email, which I'll leave down in the description. After carving out the rough shape of the 8-figure, I used my router with a router bit and a ring on it to follow the shape I had carved out previously. After this, I'll sand the top, the sides, and you can just see the wood grain come to life, and I knew this was the right way to go for this project at least, and to not carve into the wood and the epoxy. With resin pours, you always have bubbles somewhere, and especially with the 2 slabs I used, they had a lot of cracks, so I knew I would have to do minor adjustments after pouring the big layer of epoxy. So here I'm just chiseling out the micro bubbles and the bigger bubbles I got in the big pour, and filling them back up with a tabletop epoxy with the same color as the large pour I did. After my last video, someone sent me a message saying that they can't find the subscribe button. Now, for some people this might seem obvious, but for the people who don't know, this is where you find the subscribe button. And if you subscribe to my channel, you'll see all my future videos, and I would really appreciate it because it does help my channel. And for something I do in every video is tell you about how many hours went into a project. And for this art piece, it took 4 hours of cutting, flattening and shaping the wood, 4 hours of building the mold, priming and pouring the epoxy, 2 hours of flattening the top and bottom, including about another half an hour of shaping the piece to an 8-figure, 8 hours of sanding and routing, 6 hours of touch-ups, 1 hour for finishing. That's a total of 25 hours of work, so labor, and 3 weeks of drying. And of course this table took quite some space, some valuable space in my workshop. So yeah, that's about a month's work right here on your screen, or at least once it's finished, which you'll see at the end of this video what it looks like. What I mean with touch-ups is small air pockets that come in the epoxy, cracks in the wood, rotten spots, and any other minor adjustments I should do with a chisel and then fill with epoxy. This can sometimes take multiple times to get fully right, but it is the best way to get a perfect end result. For the edge profiles, I'm going to be using a chamfer routing bit with a wheel on it to trace the 8-figure I made in the art piece. And this gives a 30-degree bevel on the bottom, which gives a lighter feel and touch, and also a look to the table, which I think is really nice. And for the top, I'm going to be using a round over bit with a wheel on it also, which helps with any dents. So a round over is to remove any sharp edges of the top. The sharp edges do look very nice in my opinion, but they are impractical. So if you drop something on the edge, it's obviously going to dent much faster than a round over. And round over also looks very good in my opinion. And now I want to talk about wood and epoxy, and especially the combination of it. Now I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I have a few guidelines that help me create some beautiful art, or at least in my opinion. So the first thing I look at is if the wood is even right to add epoxy to. So these would be slabs with massive cracks running through them, knots, or rotten spots. So in wood you sometimes have rotten spots which you don't know are there until you flatten the piece or you're sanding it. So once you're sanding it, you go right through the rotten areas. These are reasons for me to use epoxy. As well, if a slab is say 40 centimeters, so I have 2 book match slabs of 40 centimeters, together they would create a table of 80 centimeters, but together with epoxy, that would make a table of 1 meter wide. Also, I look at the wood and think, is it hard enough to make a table? And if the client or I want to make a table from, say, poplar, which is a softer wood, then I could add an epoxy top layer or a river beforehand. So these would be woods that wouldn't even be eligible for a table or art piece. Or an art piece would be okay, but say you dent it on the way to transport, you would have a lower risk of when you've added epoxy or some kind of hard lacquer than if you wouldn't use that at all. So say a client comes to me and they say they want a high gloss table and they want it from a single slab of elm, walnut or any other nice wood. I can say, well, if you want high gloss, then I would advise against epoxy because you can also use a Osmo 3065 to roll on and you can achieve the same gloss. But if you ever want to change the table, so say change the style and make it matte, or you want to feel the wood grain again, you can just simply sand off the Osmo 3065 and you have a perfectly good table which would maybe fit someone else's house instead of removing all the epoxy off the top. So that is something I do think about. and I always talk with clients like, what do you want, and can I help on any things, and can I change your mind on any things, because I have expertise on wood and epoxy. So yeah, I mean, that's another thing but I've learned that over the years, is to, you know, be so good at what I do that I can advise other people or clients on what to do and what not to do, or on what I would advise and what not. So I guess that's just another thing to think about if you work with wood and epoxy, because of course if you pour the epoxy, it's going to be a lot harder to remove it than add it. So something I want to add to the fragment before this is, say I have a client who is overseas and they have a vision for a dream piece. Then I ask them, okay, what wood sort would you like, or what color of wood, and would you like epoxy, obviously? And say they want a table, 2 meters by 1 meter. I ask them, okay, what kind of finish do you want, and what kind of character would you like? If they want a table which is a single slab and they want epoxy in it, I ask them, okay, then we're going to look for a slab full of character, because a white slab is often going to have cracks and other imperfections which later add to the character of the table to fill up with epoxy resin. So that would be a perfect win-win for me and the client. I use a slab which otherwise wouldn't be possible to use, and they have a table which is their dream piece and a slab full of character which wouldn't be functional without epoxy resin. So if you're just starting out, these are just a few guidelines you can think about before using epoxy resin with wood. And I think this table you see on your screen right here is a really nice example of this, because it has a lot of character and so-called imperfections, which I call happy mistakes. Thank you, Bob Ross. And I use those so-called imperfections to fill up with the blue epoxy to create these really nice blue veins. And then I have the figuring of the table, which was sort of oval, which I cut straight and glued back up together to create these nearly emerald-like blue epoxy rivers. And then I use ruby monocoat to protect the whole of the table, but really highlight those blue veins, the character of the walnut, and just an overall beautiful piece. And the client agreed with me. He still wanted to feel the wood grain, which is also now possible. And yeah, I'm just super happy with this table. And what I'm going to do now is, or at least I've already added 1 layer of ruby monocoat. Before that, I sanded the epoxy to grit 1000 and the wood to 240. So the epoxy is going to be a lot more shiny than the wood itself. So the wood is going to be a bit more matte. And then I sanded the whole piece. So epoxy again to grit 1000, and then I do the wood to 320 to do the last layer of ruby monocoat and finally finish this piece. This build is nearly done, and I quickly want to thank you, because my YouTube has been doing extremely well and I'm really learning a lot about YouTube myself, but also, you know, you watching. And I really enjoy your comments, and just ask me anything in the comments down below. If you have a question on a build you're doing yourself, I would happily answer you. And you can also send me a message on Instagram to ask your questions, and I would happily respond. Also, if you're looking for your dream piece, of course, you can look in the description and find my contacts down there. So what was supposed to be a piece of wall art ended up being a table for the client's private office in Spain, in Altea. And I must say I'm really happy we did this instead of the organic shapes. I don't think it would have fit with the symmetry of this piece. So yeah, Nick, thank you for working together with me and making a beautiful art piece, but another function. So yeah, as always, I'm super happy, and if you want an art piece for yourself, you can send me a message on my phone number or to my phone number, my Instagram, which is masterworks_, and my email. All 3 of them will be here for a few seconds. You can stop the video, and in the description if you want to check it out later. For now, I'm going to say thank you and see you in the next video. Enjoy the beauty shots of this table.